I'm so glad that we have such a friendly group here tonight. We all like each other so much. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lorelei Stewart. I'm the director here at Gallery 400. Welcome. I'm glad you're here tonight. We're so happy to have Letha Wilson as our guest here to share about her work, but also to be on campus and meet with our students. Before I introduce our guest, I'd like to highlight a couple things that are coming up at Gallery 400, some really fantastic things that I hope you don't miss. First one is actually tomorrow night, so if you have your plans, cancel them, because the Propeller Fund, an entity that Gallery 400 runs in partnership with Three Walls, is holding its 2015 award ceremony at the Jane Addams Museum's Residence Dining Hall, and that's tomorrow night from 6 to 8. Everyone is welcome. We've awarded 14 fantastic, independent, collaborative, artistic projects that will take place all around the city. There'll be food, drink, lots of celebration, happy people thinking about the ways that art will be challenged in the Chicago landscape. And for those of you who don't know, the Propeller Fund is a 5-year entity that gives out $50,000 in awards to artist projects here in the city. So wonderful project that's really kind of making a big impact in the city, and hopefully you can come and celebrate and hear about what we've awarded this year. So that's tomorrow night. Then after Thanksgiving, on December 1st, Gallery 400 is presenting Radiant Presence. It's a slideshow by visual aids of artists in their artists registry. It's on the day of Day Without Art. And for those of you who don't know what Day Without Art is, it's a day to commemorate people who have died from AIDS and those living with AIDS, and the struggle to confront all kinds of resistance to finding health solutions for the AIDS crisis. It was founded a long time ago, but of course the AIDS crisis still continues, and we are celebrating, or not celebrating, but commemorating the day on December 1st. All day in the gallery, we'll turn our exhibition off, and the slideshow with the registry will be presented in the middle of the gallery. And for those of you who are interested or know people who would be interested, in conjunction with the slide presentation, we have partnered with TPAN, which is a advocacy organization that gives out testing. So in this room, we'll have free HIV testing. You will not be made public. There'll be a private place for you to be. And if you know people who would like to have testing or get more information about testing, please share this event. They'll be here from 2 to 5, so not the entire day, but the afternoon. And we hope that you can, if you have students or know other students, if you could share that information with them. So that's Tuesday, December 1st. The following week, the last week of the UIC semester, on Tuesday, December 8th, we'll present a very long title. It's called If I Can't Dance, The Radical Politics of Pleasure and Delight in Queer Spaces and Activism. It's a scholarly panel with academics from UIC, DePaul, UIUC, and Brown, talking about a lot of the implications in the work that Chances Dances. For those of you who don't know, Gallery 400 is presenting an exhibition called Making Chances, which celebrates the work of Chances Dances, a radical queer dance night here in Chicago. And I won't point him out, but one of the artists in the show is here tonight. And so the panel will consider topics like inclusive queer spaces, art as activism, building temporary utopias, the role of pleasure in sustaining radical queerness, and how those principles apply to, are activated by, fail, or are subsumed within contemporary LGBTQ communities and movements. So that's Tuesday, December 8th at 5:30. And lastly, I know I'm selling a lot of stuff to you right here, but I just want you to see the whole landscape of what we're doing until the end of the semester. The last day or the day after the last day of the semester, the second Saturday in December, that's December 12th, will be the last day of the exhibition, and we're holding a closing party and catalog release celebrations. And we'll have a panel discussion with Chances Dances organizers, as well as kind of a party release of the catalog of a larger program of projects for the Chances Dances 10th year anniversary. So that's 6 to 9. So hopefully your semester's ended, you're happy, you come back, you have a party with us. So that's everything that's coming up. Back to tonight. And Letha Wilson, if you've forgotten who our guest is, which I haven't. Letha Wilson is a mixed media artist who works in sculpture, photography, and installation. Using images and materials from the natural landscape as a starting point for interpretation and confrontation, Wilson often explores the magnetic pole of the West in the United States, alluding to landscape's intrinsic role in our myths of reinvention, endless possibility, and inevitable promise. In her photo-based sculptures, landscape photography as a genre is approached with equal parts reverence and skepticism. Other bodies of her work comment on the glut of material discarded in the contemporary art exhibition cycle. She'll tell us much more, so I'm going to keep that brief. Her work has been shown at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, the Bemis Center for Contemporary Art, the International Center for Photography, and the Essel Museum of Contemporary Art. Just this year, she's had solo or two-person exhibitions in Amsterdam, Syracuse, and Milan. She holds a BFA from Syracuse University and an MFA from Hunter College, and in 2009 attended Skowhegan. She currently lives and works in Brooklyn. Please help me welcome Letha Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. So I'm going to show you a whole bunch of artwork I've made, or at least attempts at making artwork, going all the way back to grad school. So I went to Syracuse for undergrad. I was a painting major there. And as a painting major, I could kind of do whatever I wanted. I took a lot of different classes in photography and sculpture, and I was always interested in combining medias and materials, merging representation, abstraction, or pushing these sort of boundaries. This first image, this is a piece I did in grad school. When I first started at Hunter, I kind of started by making these sort of large-scale pieces that were rooms you would enter. I think I'm always interested the most as a viewer in sculpture or installation or artworks that engage my body and that you can be present inside. So I learned how to build walls, drywall, and I don't know, these first pieces, were just something like I needed to sort of make these spaces actual. But I also would often be photographing them in the process. At the same time, I grew up in Colorado, and definitely in my childhood, we spent a lot of time hiking. We would take week-long backpacks into different parts of Colorado every summer, and my childhood photographs were these landscape photographs that at the time it would be sort of passing the camera around to whomever. And so when I came to the East Coast, I was always kind of carrying around these photographs of the landscape, and I didn't quite know what to do with them. So I started a series, and these first pieces, it's white out, painted onto one element of the landscape, so trying to make the representational image into an abstraction, choosing one element and whiting it out. In this case, like all the man-made objects, or the car and the cabin in this. And then from there, I sort of like put them two literally together. These are the first photo sculpture pieces, I called them, where the photograph was, I'd say, in service of the sculpture or vice versa. So in these pieces, I call them extrusions, for lack of a better term, but it's using the outline. In this case, there's two figures in the landscape, using their outline as the shape to make this three-dimensional form that sort of gushes out of the wall, almost through the image. So this was actually an image of my mother and father in Nevada. And this was the Frontier Hotel sign on the Vegas Strip. So I went to Las Vegas, Nevada to shoot photos for these pieces. This was my thesis show at Hunter. This print is 5 feet square, and the sculpture is over 6 feet tall. So they were really large, big, kind of crazy pieces that I basically couldn't move or do anything with. And I think this one ended up in a bonfire somewhere. So, but part of it was, while I had the chance to have a studio at Hunter to kind of make what I wanted to. So I made these two pieces, and at that time, I was, I felt like there was a lot of potential for ways in which a photograph could be screwed around with or ruptured or attacked. And so these were kind of my first attempt at that. I also like that the idea kind of made sense, but once I made this form, it was so weird. And you couldn't look at the image or even make out the 2D form that this shape was covering up. At the same time, I also showed a video for my thesis show, and a series of videos which I started in grad school, approaching the landscape from a different way. I'm just going to show you a couple stills. Also in the talk, I'm going to go just chronologically, and you'll see that things kind of jump around as opportunities arise or ideas change. But in grad school, I started this series of videos called Possibilities for a Car Drive, where the camera is situated on the windshield and it's giving you a first-person point of view. It starts with a single shot, and basically every 30 seconds or so, the screen splits. One goes left, one goes right, the screen splits, screen splits. So in the first pieces, they would end up in 8 different places. And it was kind of this structure which I set up, but then when I went to these places, it was kind of spontaneous in that whatever route it took me in those 8 minutes was what it was. And so I did I basically shot I made about one of these videos every year for a few years, wherever I might have been. One in Colorado in the winter, one in Scotland, one in Nevada. And it worked kind of best in small towns where you could get from maybe the center of town to the edge in like 10 minutes versus trying to shoot it in a city, which didn't work at all. And then the final piece in that series, because I felt like it kind of had to just, at a certain point, end. In this version of it, they all end in the same place, in front of this garage. So anyways, I'm just going to kind of show you a quick image of that. And then from those pieces, I did one other video in between where I had the same structure, but I shot it while walking through the forest. And then that led me to this piece, which I was invited to do a video or a piece for this show at the New Jersey Visual Arts Center. And it had this sort of interesting architecture to the gallery where you go down a hall and you turn the corner. And so I did several walks in the gallery using the architecture of the gallery as the map. And then I took this road trip to Utah and did the same walks out in the middle of nowhere. And then vice versa, I did walks out. This one on the left is from Antelope Canyon. So I did walks out in nature that were dictated by the environment or the rock formation, brought them back into the gallery and did the same walk there. So it ended up just being this sort of simple pairing of walks. And watching it was sort of like being in 2 places at the same time, and then projected back into the wall of the gallery. And then I did one more version of that piece for a show in Buffalo. And that time, instead of just using walks in the gallery, I was interested in walks that were more culturally significant or had more importance. So the one on the left is from a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Buffalo, down the street from Buffalo Art Studio where I had the show. And the one on the right is from Santa Fe, from Ghost Ranch, where George O'Keeffe lived. And that was, I think, the mountain where some of her ashes were buried. So, it was, again, a lot of times the work is kind of a what if situation. What if these 2 places were, what happens when you bring these 2 places together? Is it interesting? Is it not interesting? Kind of the importance of a certain viewpoint. And then, so going back to the sort of photo sculptures, after grad school, I kept making them for various shows that I would have. This is extrusion of 5 palm trees outside Lake Mead. And then this was made for a show in Brooklyn where it was morphing from this new high-rise condo on the left into this couple in the park. So that was the first time the forms were morphing, and it was a little bit of a smaller scale. And then this was the last extrusion piece I made, which In this case, usually I would sort of make these forms and cut them out and then sort of coat them with a material. In this case, I left it raw so you can see. So this is cut from white styrofoam, and it's in the corner of the gallery. And it's a single image, and it extrudes from my father on the left into a Joshua tree on the right. So at that point, around that point, I quit my job, and I worked at a gallery at Artist Space. One of my old colleagues is in the house here, actually. So after school and through school, I worked at Artist Space, which I definitely learned a lot about every aspect of installing, making shows, building walls, and being a webmaster and everything. But I knew I needed to really concentrate on my own work and take that leap of like giving myself the time and the energy. So another thing that around that time was I'd been applying for artist residencies. This is like a couple years out of grad school. I've been applying for artist residencies and getting rejected all over the place and like frustrated at that. So I decided to give myself an artist residency at my parents' house in Colorado. My mom wrote me an acceptance letter and the Willwood residence. I subletted my apartment and studio, and I went to Colorado for 2 months and worked in my brother's bedroom and just like, I don't know, I just knew I needed to do that, and I wasn't just gonna wait around for one of these things accepting me. So, sometimes you just have to do it if you have that feeling. And this, on that actual residency, I'm not even sure what I did. I did a bunch of little drawings and this and that, but ideas formed that then when I came back, I felt sort of a renewed energy, and things really started in my studio and my ideas working from there. So this little note I found in my notebook from that time, and I think I show it because I think it kind of sums up a lot of some of the really starting points of thinking about the work since then. Ways to say fuck you to a photograph while still adoring it secretly. Arrows, bullets, bombs, fire, acid bath. Pee, piss, cum, blood, paint, obstruction, obtrusion, hole in, hole out, cover up, waterlog, scratch, push pins, burn out, step on, crush, roll into ball. So I've done a lot of these, concrete, bricks, big drill. So it was just this thing about the photograph, this sort of frustration with this beautiful image. Even these places I had been, so I know they existed, but the image it didn't really ever do justice to the actual experience, but then it became a new thing as a photograph that was interesting on its own and could maybe persuade someone to want to go there or have this image of them going there. And the power of that, and also just the beauty of it, but also its sort of flatness, its sort of inertness, and really like what I call like a love-hate relationship with it. And also, on top of that, like at the time, photography was separate than art in the listings for galleries and all this stuff, and I never understood that because to me it was just another medium, material, tool for making work. So, but that being said, I felt like there's so many rules surrounding photography, and this is even 10 years, 12 years ago, that just were ripe to be broken. So I started making smaller work, quicker work. I actually started going to the darkroom. So the previous works I had scanned prints and printed digitally. But I decided to go back to the darkroom because for me, even though it's it doesn't really make sense actually because it is more unique. It was like less precious. The photograph is less precious if I could just go to the darkroom and print it. So I got my negatives and I started going to the darkroom and printing photographs and bringing them back into my studio and playing with them. And then the materials of my work, I'd been working with the styrofoam before, which I really didn't like as far as being toxic, but also kind of gross. And I wanted to work with materials that had a relationship with landscape or nature, but could also be this sort of two-sided, that also referred to architecture or man-made materials, wood, 2x4s. So this is just a sliver of a photograph mounted onto wood, and there's a piece of cork behind it. ways in which the photograph can move, how can it start getting off the wall, that the relationship between that sculpture and the image wasn't as direct or linear as those earlier extrusions. So things like this. So this is a 2x4 painted black and just mounted on top of the photograph. This is probably from like 2007. How I was taking photographs also started changing. It wasn't as if when I shot this I had this idea, but I think I started looking for these kind of repetition or pattern in nature as I was shooting. This piece, which is a photo I took in Muir Woods in California, and those are pieces of wood on the left painted black against the wall. Or having the photograph horizontal. There are little pieces of black tape rolled up on there and also actual rocks. So sometimes, there's humor in the gestures or action or like quick ideas. This piece, I was thinking about going back to that list of things to do to a photograph. If you pierced an arrow through the center of a piece of paper, how that paper would fillet back out at you or fold, and then trying to recreate that kind of action. So then making this wooden structure behind the photograph. And then in this case, sort of starting with that form and then choosing an image, then deciding to choose this image of looking up into the trees to place into it. So it's just a single photograph folded. Then I was invited to be in this outdoor exhibition for the first time. And like I said, I had worked at Artist Space for many years, and one of my specialties there and in the past was building walls. So I worked for an artist and was an assistant, and he was in charge of building walls at the new museum and would bring me along as his helper. So I got really good at building walls. Jen knows. But also I witnessed this like constant, for every show, and this wasn't always the case, but because drywall was so cheap, for every show the curator would want a different configuration of the gallery, and they would like tear all the walls down and build a bunch of new walls and like open it up or tear it up. So it was this constant like kind of absurd like throwing out perfectly, it's been used once, drywall, to make new things. So I decided to make an outdoor piece using the walls of the gallery and bringing them outside. And for this piece, I literally just got a U-Haul and grabbed, a fraction of a bunch of drywall that was being thrown out from Artist Space. And that is the old front desk from Artist Space in there. Jen. And the inside, so all the material was things that were being thrown out from the gallery, everything in the 2x4s and everything, and brought them out to this park in New York, a little bit out of maybe an hour north, and kind of flipping that gallery inside out. You can't really tell, but there's some vinyl on the roof. So I really just overbuilt this thing. It was in this giant park, and I like the idea of the structure being a lean-to, kind of similar to what you would find if you were camping or on the Appalachian Trail. And so it could be functional. And it was sort of looking out into the forest. And again, this was a what-if piece, like what will happen? Because the show was up for 8 months, and this was the beginning. So, sorry, this is so low, but this was at the end of the exhibition, and you can see that the water just kind of removed the paint off the roof, and then, I don't know, I thought it was actually quite beautiful how it decayed away, but it did not disappear. So that gave me the idea for, I then applied for this show at Socrates Sculpture Park. Socrates is one of the only outdoor sculpture parks in New York, and they have a really great program. So this was a proposal for a piece at this show called Waste Not, Want Not. And this piece was a planter made, all from materials that were discarded. Now, when I was told that they were going to show this piece, I was a little bit nervous about finding enough material, but within a week I had everything. And all of the wood is from this art fair called the Dark Fair, which they had for one weekend. And literally, I went in and got a huge truck full of plywood they had just painted black and then tore down and threw away. So a truckload of plywood, and then the drywall was from Matthew Mark's gallery, and they had just torn down a Jasper Johns show. So I like that idea that these walls had held the Jasper Johns show up. So the piece is called Gallery Garden, Jasper Johns. And then the Jasper's calling. So the other cool thing about the piece was the landscape. Persons who work with the park were able to get the soil and the trees all donated and the plants. And then at the end of the exhibition, everything went back into the park that I could repurpose. So I love that the whole piece was just completely made from sort of nothing into nothing. And also, the fact that it does decay over the course of the show is just part of it. So this was the beginning. This was kind of in the middle. I also planted some seeds to see what would happen. And there you can see I just overbuilt it. I just built layer upon layer upon layer. So it was super heavy and overbuilt. And there's a little remnant, some vinyl from one of the booths at the Dark Fair in there. And all the black paint is just from as it was. So nothing was treated afterwards. It's just sort of as the material was. And anyway, so it survived, and it got a little crazy. So then I actually got my first real residency in the Santa Fe Art Institute, and went back to, at the same time throughout those pieces, I'm still working in my studio on ideas with these photographs and sculptures. This is just a C print there's no negative, and then a cast of a rock at the bottom. This piece for me was kind of important, I think, made there. Around this time I got my box camera, which it's an old Yashica matte camera, which I still use. I've never bought a camera until I did buy one last year, but it was just using this hand-me-down camera. And once I started using this medium format camera, it was really created some much more, beautiful images, where you get a lot more detail in the negatives. So this photograph was one that I'd taken right afterwards, and I really love this photograph. It's for this place kind of near where my parents live in Colorado, and I went snowshoeing up there. So this photograph was hanging on my wall for a while, and I was like, what do I do with this? It's so pretty. I don't know what to, and it was kind of like driving me crazy. So then I just had this idea of like punching it in the face. And so the piece is also, something else I think about is how is a photograph or work hung, how is it held onto the wall? So this is a single piece of plywood with a 45-degree angle circle, and then the photo's like plugged between the wood and itself. So the pressure of it pushing down on itself causes the edges to splay out. And then there's this relationship from the material to the image, but also I really enjoy when that photograph can be its own. That print curls and gets weird and funky if it's humid, and it does its thing. And the wood does its thing, and they have this kind of relationship. So to me, that was kind of a nice piece. But then I finally got into Skowhegan, where I had applied for 9 years before I got in, just saying. 9 years. But I got into Skowhegan, and that was, I am glad that I did not get in those other 8 years or whatever, because at this point, I'm 5 years out of grad school. I have, a studio practice. I'm making work, but my community is kind of moving away or not making work, or I'm yearning for this kind of conversation about the work. So it was just like a wonderful summer with 65 artists, Matt Metzger included, and studio visits and conversations. And also my studio is kind of situated right at the edge of this vast forest. So I really, it was really great for me to have that, because usually my studio is so separate from the landscape and nature, and I was kind of nervous, could I still make work when nature's right there and it's so much better looking than what I'm doing? But it ended up my relationship to the natural world changed, because I had time to take slow walks out in the forest and notice things I wouldn't have normally, and realized I could take a photo like this of a pile of rocks, and that could be a work. not just the vista. And in a way, then it sort of opened it up, like anything could be a potential image for the process, and it relieved the pressure of when I go out and shoot photographs, because I can't go wrong. It's sort of like my job when I'm shooting is to sort of be present and look and try to capture what I see, but not have expectation going into it. So this is just spray paint onto this paper. So these kind of immediate gestures. This piece is a photograph folded into a paper airplane, then unfolded. And then again, this little guy was kind of hanging out in my studio for a while until sort of someone noticed it. And I was like, it really kind of does sum up a lot of what I had been thinking about, and you recognize that form, but it also overlays on top of the sunset and changes it. This piece I made at Skowhegan, trying to get that photo to bend and move, and in this case I was just sort of thinking about this loop, and it's a single photograph mounted that was cut into strips and mounted onto a wiggle board. Double dip, it's called. And then I made this piece at Skowhegan, which was something I had been thinking about kind of in the back of my mind for a while. And, coming from those drywall pieces. But in this piece, the origin of the drywall really doesn't matter. I was interested in, then again, this flipping of nature and the gallery space. So what if the gallery's wall is out in nature, and then how does that shift the relationship? And I was actually more interested in this plane, because I tried to build that wall as level as I could, and that juncture where these branches are coming out through it. And is that interesting, or is that jarring? I didn't even really think about the light and the shadows, which ended up being completely like the show stealer in this piece. So you approach it from behind. It's an 8-foot square wall. The back is open. It's built with 2x4s, and I know how to do this because this is what I would do all the time at the gallery, like build walls around pipes and this and that. So people always ask me how I made it. It's just drywalled. So that was kind of a cool. And to go see the piece, you have to go out into the forest to see it. There's a little closer view. They took it down, unfortunately. I thought they would just leave it up for forever. But I went back the next summer and was saddened to see all of it cut down. So this piece kind of came was right after that, and so to me they're kind of related. This is called Right Back at You, and it's a flashlight leaning against those rocks and shining into the photograph of that sun. And again, in this case, that's the sculptural element is the light. And this piece was so weird. It was fun. It's funny and strange, and I wasn't sure what I thought about it, but it's interesting how when I would show it, people just had really strong reactions. The strange thing about it is it almost looked like the light was coming from behind the piece, but it was just the flashlight reflected into it. So then back, this piece, or there's lots of ways I think about kind of breaking down the photograph or the frame. So how can you break out of the frame, literally bust out of it? A print has a piece of rubber that the photo is mounted on, and it comes out of the frame. What about the back of a photograph? So this is a photograph mounted to colored paper that was painted. And those little triangles are cut, and you can't really tell actually. They're folded out towards you. So you see the wall through the holes, and you see the back of the photograph painted red, and then you see the image. To me, this is kind of like a drawing, and continue that. Vertical horizon, a horizontal landscape pushed into a vertical frame with the extra kind of bulging out. And then the same idea, but pushed into a frame. Then again, how is the photograph held up, or how is the image held up? So in this case, the photograph is woven through the drywall. 2 pieces of drywall are cut out, and it's sort of weaved. Again, I did this piece at a small scale, and then when I did a larger scale, it changed quite a bit because it was just drooping out kind of in a crazy way. So, and photo mounted to plywood with a hole cut. So sometimes Like in this case, the gesture or that sort of idea of the photo going into the wall is the starting point. And then I go through my archive of images and choose something that I think works. Whereas in this case, when I see the image, then I have this idea right away of repeating this triangle. Part of my process, and at this point, like I hadn't even made that decision, but there was, around this time, I had this idea for a piece after watching Ken Burns' documentary on the Grand Tetons. And I thought, well, do I have to go to the Grand Tetons? I could just go to Google and find an image and download it. So I spent a day or two trying that, and nothing this angle was wrong, this angle was wrong, this angle was wrong, and then I just decided, you know what, I have to go to the Grand Tetons. And I called my mom and dad, and I said, can we go to the Grand Tetons next summer? And my dad, of course, did not want to go because he hates people and large, national parks are terrible. So he wants to go to these little places. So we kind of agreed to go for a couple days. And anyways, I did go to the Grand Tetons. But the other part is that I decided that for my process and my practice, it's important that I take these photographs, that I go to these places and I'm there. And then it comes back. So the original idea never happened, but a whole bunch of other pieces came from it. So the process of the work could take years. The photograph could be from last year, and then there's a cycle that happens. So I go out, I shoot, I come back, and then when I go to the darkroom, and I still print in the darkroom. And so here we go. These are from the Grand Tetons, actually. This is a small addition I made. So most of the time, all the works are unique. This was occasionally I do additions. The one on the left is called Moondrop, and the one on the right is called Light Leak. And the one on the right, there's a photograph mounted to the back that's this kind of color of red that you get if you have a light leak in the darkroom. And the white you see is the wall behind it. This is another addition I did, the double-sided digital print that you kind of assemble yourself, and it has these sort of different ways of hanging it. But kind of like trying to break that square, rectangle, somehow being a challenge. Then I started working in concrete. I'd been wanting to work with concrete for a while, but on a residency, finally had a chance to play with it. And the first piece this is pretty much my first piece, I think, with concrete. This form was, this was crazy, because I actually cut a hole through the photograph that I'd mounted on plywood and poured the concrete through the photograph into this mold, which seemed a little extreme, but so it's one solid piece, and the concrete is in this shape. This is another early concrete piece where, oh my gosh, and I probably had to make this piece 3 times because I didn't know what I was doing, but well, the first time I tried to make it, the concrete part was in 2 parts, and the photo was 1 part, and that was insane. So then I actually cut a slot in the photograph, and then basically the concrete piece and the photograph are holding each other up like a teepee, and the piece is called Sunset. This piece, I just slathered cement onto the back of the photograph. And it's held its position. Again, this is the Grand Tetons. It's called Hug. So I think also a lot of times I think of the photograph as a body and sort of gestures of how it's sort of hanging or holding in relation to the wall or whatever. So that sort of was the idea behind this piece. Then I had still a show at Vox Populi, and some of those last pieces were shown in it. I went to go visit the space in Philly, and I noticed there was a wall that had a window behind it that you would never know. So I had an idea for this piece where I cut the drywall out, the holes out of the drywall, and also the holes out of the photograph. And I honestly had no idea what would happen until I went to the gallery and did it. So this is the way it looked at night. You can see the dusk. I really like that because I was worried that at night the piece would just fail. But I ended up really liking that blue of just I don't know, why is the air blue when you look at it? It's so freaking crazy. But the blue of like a dusk sky in contrast with that red of the imaged rock and how it sort of vibrated from this real, imagined, real. And it changed, like then you could see the lights of the city through it, and you could feel the draft of air from behind the wall. And then in the morning, it would do this little cool light play on the ground as the sun went through the piece into the gallery. So that was fun. But again, like honestly, I didn't know what would happen until I got there. Then I, continuing my play with concrete, thought, what if I pour the concrete into a framed photograph? So this is like the first one I did like that, with 2 pieces of wood to kind of stop it. And then I did a couple more of those. And then I was on a residency in Bemis for about 3 months, so I really got to get dirty with the concrete for a while. And then when I was making these pieces, this is one where there's a hole cut and it oozes out in front also. And going back to this one, there's one piece, the next piece I made after this, the glass broke. And then I really actually liked seeing the concrete without the glass there, so the next ones I made, I kind of removed the glass. This piece is called 2x4, and again, I made this at Bemis also. And again, thinking of how is the photograph held to the wall. So in this case, there's a hole cut out of the drywall. The 2x4 is pushes the photograph into the wall. You can't really tell very well, I'm sorry, from this image. And the photo kind of splays out like a book page, and then I pin the sides in. So this link between the image, the origin, this material, what's behind the wall. This piece called Waterline, and it's a single photograph, again from the Grand Tetons, cut and folded in a way where you get this extra loop of material, and then that loop comes out of the print, and it's a found piece of steel that hangs in the print. So, like, how strong is a photograph? Can it hold up a piece of steel? Pushing it, as a material. And again, at this point when I say photograph, like very specifically C prints, because that's what I'm working with. Rock face. So this piece was, again, like I cast this rock at Skowhegan. It's a cast of a rock, so it's a fake rock, but I actually cast a real rock. And I had the idea at Skowhegan where it was just this landscape with the rock in front of it, and how funny is that? You can't see the landscape because the rock's covering it. But when I actually did it in my studio, it was really boring, and I was like, okay, that's a pretty bad idea. So, but I held on to the rock, and I dragged it across the country to my random, whatever residency I was on. And then at Bemis, I had this idea of cutting a hole in the wall behind it, and then like slamming the rock into the wall, so you can see it suddenly, like the photo is like, enlivened by this. It is pushed in, you see the pressure, it bows out, it gets crinkled, it gets ruptured, and I started laughing. So I was like, okay, this is good. Once I laugh out loud in the studio, I feel like it's a good moment or whatever. So that is how I finally resolved the piece. But again, it took me a couple of years to get to that. And people always think this piece is really big, but it's like this. It's not very big. It's a couple feet. But that is something something about photography which I enjoy is the possibility for it to be scaled up. So there's some later pieces where things get big. Then this was near you in Chicago. This is at the Morton Arboretum. And actually, so from the residency at Skowhegan, one of the other artists there had seen the piece I did in the forest, and then she proposed to me to be in this group show at the Arboretum. So this is really cool because I got to make that piece on a bigger scale, and really do it large and do it in a public situation. So I did a site visit to the Arboretum, which I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a really beautiful place. The Morton Arboretum, it's enormous. And I chose this tree. I wanted to use a deciduous tree. I was curious how the leafing out of the tree would sort of change the piece over time. And the other nice thing about the piece is you approach it by foot from the front. There's a trail around the lake. But from behind, if you're in a car, you can only see the back of it. So it kind of forces people to get out and walk around it. It's also facing west. So I built the piece in early May, and this before the leaves really came out. I think it's 18 by 16 feet or so. There you go. And again, so there is literally, first of all, the Arboretum is very concerned about their trees. So there's not a single screw into this tree in this piece. There are a couple of, there's maybe 3 cleats that go into the ground, but the piece is really built around the tree. There was a little girl, as I was building this, who screamed and said, "Mommy, she cut all the branches off!" And she was really freaking out because she thought I'd cut all the branches of the tree off and then reattach them, which would have been really hard, but I had to assure her that it was okay. But anyways, so this is the back view. You can see that the 2x4s are kind of woven around the branches. That's the view you would get if you were in the car. And this is as the tree starts changing. So this is later on in May. And again, depending on the day and the sun and how it's looking, the thing I like about this piece is it's so simple because it's just this wall, but it reflects the tree, and then suddenly, when set up against this backdrop, you just notice so many things about a tree that you might otherwise overlook, I think. This is kind of late May. This is June, late June, back. It's such a cool tree. It's a blue ash tree, by the way. Yeah. And it was up through Thanksgiving, so it was up for, I don't know, a good 6 months there. And so then, back to Brooklyn, coming back from Bemis and those pieces with poured concrete, I started these pieces where there is a frame. You can't really tell from this image. I'm pouring these pieces inside a wood frame. I want the photograph to move and to bend and to not just be flat. So in these, I'm kind of wrangling the image, pouring concrete on the face, flipping it over. That hole is from a 2x4. In these pieces, I also use spray paint. So I made a series of these pieces for a show at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. The Badlands. So this is a new process for me because it was blind, and I couldn't control it. I mean, each piece was a one act, one shot, So it was kind of risky, and it was me getting used to that without relinquishing control. This piece actually, see that bright yellow spot in there? That was a piece of concrete fell off, and the emulsion from the photograph transferred to that little piece, and that gave me an idea to make a whole bunch of other work. So that was the first time that happened by accident. And this piece is concrete and photograph frame and gold spray paint. And I think at the time I was thinking of the spray paint as another kind of mark, also referring more to the urban mark and this kind of other layer of information. This is folded with cement poured on it, and the photograph is from the salt flats. And in some parts it's super delicate, the photo's coming out and extruding past the frame, but yet it's heavy. This is the largest piece I made for that show, and it's 3 feet by 4 feet. I think it weighs about 200 pounds. And this is several images. So I realized that now, it doesn't have to be a single image because the form gets so abstracted in the process. I can layer several images. So this is 7 or 8 different photographs and several pours of concrete. And then I use plywood for the mold, so then you also have this impression of the plywood. That's another layer in the work. Floor piece. It's really hard to make floor pieces for some reason. I like to think I'm a sculptor, but so many of my pieces are hinging on the wall. And I think part of it is that distance you have when it's on the floor, you're so much farther away, so you kind of have to scale things up. So I would like to make more floor pieces, but there aren't that many in my repertoire yet. And this is that triangle is poured concrete in the photograph. It's from New Mexico. So then this piece, I was invited to propose a piece back at Bemis where I had done the residency in Omaha by the curator, Hessie McGraw, who's like a really awesome curator. And to me, this piece, relates back to, there's so many factors that ended up making it work. It was an idea I had a while ago where the architecture of the space is the sculptural interloper into the work. And also, I think, relating back to that wall and tree piece and another iteration. So this column is wood. It's part of the structure of the space. These columns go throughout the building. And the photograph was one that I took after I left Bemis. I drove to the Badlands, to Devil's Tower, back to Colorado. So it was this photograph I'd taken at Devil's Tower. And in Devil's Tower, it's like where the UFO lands in that movie, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right? It's this amazing mountain, and I went there to shoot it, and like none of the photos of that mountain they all look stupid. Like, I don't know, couldn't capture it. You're too close to it, it's not right. But this photograph was from walking around, so in my mind, it's sort of linked to that site in this kind of magical place, but it's this photograph just of a tree and this giant rock and the shadow. For the piece at Bemis, I scaled the photograph so the tree was exactly the same width as the column, kind of like that. So from the front, you can't see the tree, and as you turn around the piece, you see it. And then another nice thing is the gallery has a window to the left, so there's the image of the shadow, the actual shadow, and that's the back, and it's just a wall. They actually built the wall in advance for me. That's a detail, and then I went and applied the print and cut it out just carefully. So then back in New York, this was the first piece I used that transfer method I discovered into a piece. So that maybe was that other layer of information which I was looking for with the spray paint, which ended up for me working better with this way. There's a photograph in there, there's concrete, and then those other ghost images kind of are from where another photograph was face down on the concrete and then the emulsion was transferred onto it. This one, so I made this piece and I did not take very good notes in my studio. So to all you artists out there, don't do what I did. It was a happy accident, and I ended up having to spend the next 6 months like buying every brand of concrete that Home Depot has to show because I didn't remember what made it happen. So it was like a lot of R&D at this point afterwards to pinpoint like what I had discovered, because this is something that I just made up. So this is another little piece, and again, like I often make small pieces to start with, and this is an example of where I couldn't really scale it up. So this is, I think, about, 11 by 13, and this photograph cut in strips, and this again, like this idea of how strong is the photograph and can it hold the concrete in, and the way the concrete kind of oozes out around, and it worked really well. But when I tried to make this larger, it just failed because there's a certain time you have until the concrete sets, and like you're fighting it, and it was just me, and I couldn't do it, So it ended up just being this. And then I made some plank pieces, wanting to have a large scale, but maybe not the weight of some of those other pieces. So this size is based on a 2x4, but in this case, a 2x8 piece of wood by 8 feet, and several photographs inside, and poured concrete, leaning against the wall, and some spray paint. And then from that, when I did the show in Vienna, they invited me to make a piece, and this was kind of a bad idea, but I proposed to make all new work there on site, and I used their basement, and they rented me a concrete mixer, and I poured these 10 planks that are 10 feet tall and 10 inches wide, and they each weigh about 100 pounds. So there they are kind of laid against, and then they shipped them back to me, which I really didn't appreciate. And now I lug them around from storage space to storage space for the rest of my life. Anyways. But, you don't really think about it when you're making it. So this one, I used some spray paint too in some of them as a mark. That was a gallery shot. So now this right now is starting, this is 2012. This is my first solo show in New York. I've been there for a while, a long time. And I mean, for me, it was really interesting, this shift that happened. Like, I always hang out with like painters and sculptor people, but then there was this moment where the photo people started noticing me. And it was so weird because I just thought they would hate me because I was kind of like going to the darkroom and breaking all the rules and going really fast and like ripping stuff and tearing things. But at the same time, I'm talking about what they're doing and I want to say like, well, what else can you do? So I started getting this attention from this gallery that I did my first show at. It's called Higher Pictures, who I still show with. And she is showing these artists that are pushing the boundaries of photographs and sculptures. And she had Sam Fall's first 2 shows in New York, and Jessica Eaton, and Travis Smalley, and Artie Vierkant. So it was a good fit for me, but it was also like this new world. So these are some of the images. So for that show, this piece is all transfer. I did a series of tondos. I like that idea as another way to break up the square. And it was also because I was using these cut-off sonotubes for my tests, so I'd already gotten used to these kind of circles. So in this case, what you're looking at is pure concrete, and the folded photograph in this circular mold is creating the shape and the image. This piece, which was the only like site-specific piece I did for the show, it's a very small gallery. What came from a small test I'd done at Bemis, where the concrete column is holding the photograph up. In that case, scaling it up was kind of a major process. The column is 8 feet tall, so the whole piece is about 9 feet tall. And I made the print in the darkroom, again, the Grand Tetons. And this piece is so weird because I had to make a structure inside of it that's holding it. It weighs probably 150 pounds, but it's so fragile, like the sides, it's just a photograph. But I really like that. And again, talking about that other piece, the photo does its thing. It bends, it moves, and the concrete, holds it together in the center. So that was like kind of this specific piece I made there. And again, like had this one shot. This is so weird because I was making this piece in my studio and it was right as when the hurricane happened in New York and everything was flooding, and like I had to make this piece. I was on this deadline and I had this giant like scaffold built, and it was like the wind was howling outside and like Mother Nature, and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? But it was this moment, where, I don't know, something about that. So these pieces are dipped in cement, and then the cement residue cracks off. So again, it was a kind of an experiment. What would happen if, I didn't think it would do this. I thought it would maybe attach better, but so then I ended up doing a whole series, all from photographs I shot at the salt flats and dipping them in cement. And pattern of that. And then in that show also are these photograms. The first time I had a chance really to like think of black and white images in the work, and was when I was on a residency at Yaddo. They have a black and white darkroom. And I tried making prints and it just didn't really make sense, but I started making photograms with objects from the forest that I was walking around anyways, and then also some studio debris or sticks or rocks. Also in the darkroom as I'm printing, I use rocks and in my studio to hold down paper a lot, so it was kind of a natural progression. So for this series, I mounted a color print on the back of the prints that are folded and cut out. So you see that image on the back, and then also the wall through the middle. And it was like, someone made an interesting comment about that piece, which I hadn't even really thought of, like, what is more true, what is more accurate, that silhouette of the actual object as a referent to it, or as a record, or the image of that tree, and then what is more kind of real. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting to think about that. Another one. And the photograms really feel like drawings, and they're also so much more precious because they're just, there's only one, you can only make one, it's specific to it. So it's been harder for me to like work back into it because, again, I think part of my process is trying to lose the preciousness of it, the photograph. Another Tondo from that show. I'm going to try to go a little faster. I feel like I'm going too slow. This piece was sort of the inverse of that piece. So it was this, So the image is too subtle to transfer in this way. So in this piece, it's just the photograph folded. So to me, these kind of go together, and how I was thinking about it. A hole through the middle, photograph and transfer. This is a photograph from the Badlands. And then I start using aluminum frames. They're a little stronger and they hold that up. And so this is, I've made 2 artist books. This is the first one. Sorry, this is not a good image, but I wanted to just show an image, some sort of reference of it. That's the center. So for the next show I did at Art in General, it's a huge space, and I actually finally had like a production budget. And the first piece I wanted to make was the book. It had been an idea I'd been rolling around my head for a while. And basically, like I can make works inside this format where you can touch it and handle it, and then you can see the front and the back of an image in a book form. But also I liked to be able to break the rules of the book, cutting holes, tearing pages. So it was important for me that the book have some actual like physical interventions into it. So the one on the right, there's a cut and slot. So it's an edition of 500, and I hand cut each one of them, or with my assistant doing some things. This is spray paint down the center of the book in the middle. And then, so that was the first piece, and the largest, but the smallest. And then for this show at Art in General, it was like such a really great opportunity for me. Incidentally, I have been an art handler at this gallery so many times. And when I first moved to New York, I didn't know what I was doing. They like hired me to help install a show, and it was, do you remember this? It was Calzilla and Alora, the guy from that. We didn't know what the heck. We had to ask the artist what drywall was, and like we didn't know. But since then, I had been hired many times to build walls in this gallery and to demolish walls in this gallery. So and actually I like this story because it's like these weird ways you end up being places. The curator from the show, she used to work at the Lower East Side print shop. And I applied for that residency so many times. I never got it. But Courtney emailed me because she saw my rejected proposal and she liked my work. So she did a studio visit with me, and then years later she started working at Art in General. She was the assistant curator, and then years later she was the curator. And then she invited me to a show there, all from me being rejected. So I'm just saying. And anyways, and now she's at the Aspen Art Museum. But for the show, it was such a great opportunity because I was very familiar with the space, and they kind of just gave me carte blanche. I was able to have 3 weeks to install the show, so I made a lot of it on site. That piece on the right is, to date, the largest concrete piece I've made. It's 6.5 feet by 5 feet. It probably weighs 800 pounds. I made it right in front of where you see it there in the gallery. Laid a bunch of plastic down. There was first week and a half of the show was concrete time, and I poured that piece. I poured that piece on the wall to the left, and then I made this piece on site for the show. I really wanted to do something site-specific and working around these columns, which are quite different, and I love the idea of the photo like bending around this column, and the column being almost like a skewer or a drawing line or something through it. So for this piece, it's double-sided. I ended up making it out of Italian bending poplar, and I wanted as thin as possible, and then it's several photographs. I had to tile the photographs because there's just not a printer that large, and attach it. That's the front. And it's from the Grand Tetons. So that's a gallery shot. It was big. And then the piece is destroyed at the end of the show. A sort of a larger version of the 2x4 piece, but this is a 10-foot 2x4 holding up this photograph and plunging into the wall. You can see the detail. These are prints. I was doing that dip into cement, and these are dip face down into cement. And as the longer they cure, the more emulsion they remove. So the one on the right was curing for 24 hours. The one on the left was curing for 48 hours. So I show them together. This floor piece, which, again, this piece had been sitting in my brain for a while. It's called Face Down. I love the idea of this photograph that you can't see any of it, but like the little corner of it. And for a while, I thought about using cement on the back, and then I finally had this idea of using Corten steel, and then the steel's rusted. So metal is another material which I'm just starting to work with, but I'm excited to sort of continue, because to me it also makes sense. This is a photograph with concrete poured behind it, so the horizon line is just sunk in. It's poured face down, and that piece of plywood is just, I mean, the weirdest thing about this piece is like, it's so different than the flat image, and you just wouldn't really know until you do it. It's like, again, I made a small test and worked it up to this scale. And this is a kind of a more refined iteration of that piece I did in Philly. So also at Art in General, there is a hidden window which actually hadn't been opened, I think, in 25 years, which I saw on the floor plan. I was very excited. So I cut the drywall out. We opened the shutters, the metal shutters, cleaned the window, put the drywall back on, and then I installed this piece. This time the photograph is mounted to aluminum that's been CNC routed. So the flip back side of the piece is the aluminum. And then you see the window behind it. This is what it looks like in the afternoon. It looks like the Big Dipper. I don't know why. It's really interesting because it changed throughout the course of the summer. I mean, the show was up from May till June or July, so some odd things. There's the big one. Yeah. Those are photographs from Bryce Canyon and Maine. And then, so continuing, I mean, for me, the concrete has continued to be interesting as a process. I feel like I learn more every time I make a piece and get new ideas for new techniques with it. And I've kind of just basically followed it. This piece, which I ended up making like several iterations of, is called Rock Hole Punch. And it basically, like, I pour it upside down with a piece of foam. And so it's like the weight of the concrete pushing down on the photograph makes this shape. And then I cut the photograph out of the center. So folding the dips first so you can see how they're folded, trying to get the photo to move. The transfer, this one has some pigment in it. I did a residency in California at the Headlands. And then 2 years ago, this was really cool. I got a travel grant to go to Hawaii. I was born in Hawaii, but we moved to Colorado when I was 4, and I had never been back there. So I wrote a travel grant proposal to go to Hawaii for a month, which they accepted somehow. Anyway, so that was a really great experience. I spent 1 week in each of 4 islands and just shooting photographs. So that material came back in the work and offered this other kind of landscape, which I hadn't been privy to yet, and this green, lush green. The folded photograph and the colors from a couple of different concrete additives. Can a bend happen? This is from a construction material used for roofs in the fern. and then like started to pour them into Corten steel frames. I was thinking of ways in which then the frame starts kind of coming into the work or rusting into the work, or is more related to it than this sort of white separate entity. Holes going through. This piece, oh my God. So this piece, I was invited to do a piece for the show at the Katzen Arts Center in Washington, D.C. And it's this crazy gallery that's like really circular, like a half circle, and it's 20-something feet tall. And it's just this, to me, it's like an impossible space to show art. Like, who wants to hang art on a curved wall? Like, that's just mean, you know? So I was like the only, and it's enormous, and their budget was like this, and I was like, what do I do, you know? So I felt like I had to sort of like throw something back into this architecture or do something against it or push it out, you know? And this piece, it's like, it looks simple, but it was just such an effort because I'm really glad with the way it all turned out, but it's a single piece, a 20-foot piece of 2 by 10 and a hole in the wall, and then it's this sort of prop piece where the wood is holding the photograph up, but also puncturing it, and the viewer walks under it and over it, and it's just sort of this statement in the space. So the photograph is, I think, about 6 by 8 feet. And walking the plank, it's so crazy. It's just, it's a digital print, but people kept asking me if it was aluminum, but it's just a print. I mean, I have one shot to do this. I was sweating on that. Okay, okay, sorry. I'm almost done, I swear to God. I'll go quick. So these are the largest, this is from the show at Higher Pictures. And the largest concrete pieces on the wall, they weigh about 350 pounds. Several images, and I'm just refining the technique as I go. And then for that second show, something that goes through the gallery wall, double-sided print on dye bond, and peeks through the back of the gallery into the office. Yeah. This show was in Amsterdam and in June. And again, sort of a combination of half the works with the concrete, the images, and half the works using metal or steel. This piece, there's a hole through the wall that you can see actually out through the window, and this sort of peephole. And then you can see the gallery show through the other side also that this print is hanging on. And some photographs. Yeah, okay, I can show a lot of stuff, but I'm almost done, I promise. But this will be like, these are sort of future things I'm working on and excited about, and this continues that photogram series I did, but it's a photograph of a photogram that has been cut and then printed onto a photograph of a material. So better to see in real life. And this was a show where I actually was mounting the work onto a concrete wall, which was kind of nice, so then the work kind of seems like it's kind of oozing out of the walls itself, which I enjoyed. Okay, I'm almost done, I promise. We're just gonna go quick. So this is a show that's up now in New York, in case you go to New York from now until December 16th. I'm in a 3-person show there. This is welded aluminum, which is the new thing. And then you get the burns from the weld onto the photograph. And this piece, which is just the photograph, is slotted into the wall, and that's how it's held up. This is a detail, so it's like just this very precise cut into the wall. And Big Blue. So, I mean, well, this was the image from a long time ago that I pulled back from 2007 and reused in this piece that weighs, yeah, about 300 pounds. And a new baby. So these are, and back to the Tondo. So again, this sort of form I never thought I could achieve because it breaks, the material breaks in the center, but kind of returning back to that and just trying it out. So anyways, that's enough. Sorry.
So if people have questions or comments, if I could give you the microphone, we're recording tonight's talk, and I would love to get your question or comment on the mic.
I may have answered all your questions.
Could you talk about, so a lot of your photographs seem to be about travel and you going to these grand spaces, but I was wondering if you could talk about how you maybe think about that when you're in the studio, the experience of travel, and maybe how you're traveling through these different materials in a experimental way, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of, I mean, that's why it's sort of interesting, this, like, my studio is in New York City in this box of concrete, and it's so separate from these places, so maybe something about it being so far away and coming back, or, you know, a little moment from that original trip kind of returning with me, but then to re-see it in a different context, it changes, so that duration or space-time travel of both the image and me through it then, like, comes into the work in the studio in this way, sometimes from an observation, sometimes from a literal thing, but more often, I don't know, like, through the seeds of transformation. And, like, that's another thing I like about working with photography, is I have this archive of images I've taken from these trips, but sometimes I'll go back through and just look at them and then, like, notice things I never noticed. Like, I never noticed this picture before. When I looked at it 2 years ago, I was in a different space and I didn't notice. Or, like, I have this new idea, and then the way that images can change over time for me and my relationship to them, that's nice to have a continual cycle. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that like, constant, like, looking back and forth between place and space and where I am now and where I was kind of runs through the work.
I was wondering, do you ever, when you take images, already have an idea of what kind of installation it would be? Or is it more just of experimentation with the photographs?
You know, or like earlier on in some of the pieces, like even in grad school, I was kind of going out there looking for a certain, you know, I want a scene with no cars, no trees, no whatever, like, which of course I'm usually inclined towards anyways, but it was sort of difficult. Like, I took a lot of images and was never really happy with them. I think the other thing about my process now is I'm shooting with a camera that is this old-fashioned box camera. I can't even see it. I have a digital camera, which I usually shoot alongside with, but I don't really have any idea what it's gonna look like. So I think there's part of this not knowing and hoping and this chance of shooting, so that kind of like what I was saying, I don't try not to tie myself down with having an idea in mind when I go shoot. I'm maybe more interested in a certain place or a general geography or topology, or maybe sideline with a trip to my family or something. But I try not to, like, go into those spaces with any kind of preconceived idea of what image is going to come out, or even what work is going to come out. So it always happens afterwards.
So you mentioned gallery and archiving, or at least archival a couple times, and I'm curious how your experience working with galleries, or like just in keeping an archive of your own images, how that influences the way that you make work. Like, do you consider the archival properties of your work moving forward, or do you expect to destroy a lot of it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky. I think that I try to do my best, often just to keep the work from falling apart, like, at all. There's a structure that needs to be made behind the pieces to keep them from completely crumbling. So I try to do my due diligence, and obviously with photography, like, and this transfer, I use UV spray to try to protect it from this and that, but, like, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to look like in 500 years. And there's people that haven't bought the work because that's a concern of theirs. But I really felt strongly that I wasn't going to let that stop me from making the stuff I want to make. Because I think that especially, it seems like, I don't know why, in photography that people get really hung up on the word archival. And maybe, fine, for good reason, I get it. But, like, at the same time, like, whatever, we might all be gone in like 100 years. So I don't know, I just make the thing that I want to make while trying my best to keep the best, my due diligence, or to make it as well as I can without it stopping me from making it. So yeah, good question.
So using a lot of landscape in your images, or in your work, I would say, what is nature for you? What is nature for you?
I mean, I think that that's a kind of a tough question to answer. I mean, my relationship to nature, which has been kind of cultivated over my lifetime, sometimes not by my choice, because my dad forced us to go on these hikes in the summer, which at the time I thought was really annoying. But then there are these moments, like, I think the most memorable or intensive memories I have were these backpacks we took. So every summer, me, my mom, and dad, and brother would take a week-long backpack into Rocky Mountain National Park or the Flat Tops or different places. And it was like, oh, this is so annoying. We have to leave all our friends and do this. But after you hike for several days out into the middle of nowhere, it was like you would get to these places and these vistas you just felt like were incredible. You felt like you were the first person ever to literally set foot onto this place because you're so remote. And I think something about those experiences and being so out there, being so removed, just were stayed with me in this way. It's powerful and it's incredible and it's magical, and I don't understand, I'm always amazed that the sun goes up and the sun goes down and the shadows do this and the line is flat, and why does water go, the science behind it, I understand there is some reasons why, but it seems so incredibly mysterious and magical when you're out there, it's kind of amazing. So I think I try to observe, and also, because I live in the city, I've been in New York City for 17 years. So when I go back to Colorado or go to these places, I think I'm way more appreciative of it, and I try to kind of suck up all I can about those experiences when I'm there. And to kind of recognize and notice. And I also think in terms of art, it's about looking and seeing and your body in relation to things, and there's a lot you can learn from nature in those ways, and perception and perspective. So I don't know, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
But it changed a lot in the last couple of years, right? Landscape or the environment we are walking in, right?
Yeah.
So is that an issue?
I think the
for you?
awareness. I think that I hope that in my work, I am glad when people see my work and think twice about any of that, I think that for me, something that could be more, call it political, or talking about the subject of what's happening in our world and our environment, may come from just taking a second to even look at it or look at it in a new way. And in the beginning, it was how can a landscape be contemporary? Because it is, today, but I think that especially in cities, we have this way of dismissing it or writing it off as something other or so foreign that it almost doesn't exist. So how can we kind of reimagine it as something that isn't cheesy or dated or cliche? And I think it's also this, I don't know, that's what I'm interested in, how can it be continuing to be, because it is interesting, but to me at least.
Can you talk a little more about your core 10 pieces, especially the face down one, I think with the photograph kind of peeking up, and its relation to minimalism a little bit, because I'm interested in that.
Yeah, well, definitely, oh my gosh. I think the interest in minimalism or the relation to minimalism is there, and also kind of goes back to what I was saying about these forms and this sort of juxtaposition of shapes in the landscape, or we want to see something that makes sense to us in a mathematical way. The triangle, the square, the circle, and using that to kind of hem in the form. But then within that, having some sort of chaos. So like I use those geometries as a way of kind of holding it together. And then I don't know, I think even when I'm looking at and then taking photographs, those sort of iterations of lines or diagonals or waves, it's like that's where my mind goes, you know, or even when I'm shooting things. And, you know, earth art and pieces, but I think that those relationships between the simple forms and the landscape are kind of, they go hand in hand in a way, even though they're also like so different. So I don't know if that answers your question, but okay, she said yes.
I had a question. So you've mentioned a lot the weight of this concrete sculptures, and especially now with photographs being digital, they almost have like no physical presence. So I'm wondering if, because you've mentioned it so many times, if the weight of these sculptures is part of the content of the work for you?
Yeah, they're so heavy. It's like, yeah. I mean, it's one. I mean, I think that's part of why the work has also, people are interested in it. I mean, when I started printing in the darkroom, I felt like I was a fish going the wrong direction in the stream, but it was something I needed to do to grapple with this image. I think it's really interesting that I'm in shows and exhibitions alongside all of these artists that are using digital ways to push the photograph, but there's all these other ways to push the photograph, and actually only through analog, because for me that was the most immediate way, because if I don't have a scanner, I don't have a printer or whatever, I can just go to the darkroom and bring my negatives. And there's something about that to me wasn't, ideal for working. Like, it's so much more immediate. There's no intermediary. I mean, there's the camera and the film, but that relationship between me and the image is like super close. So that's why I still do print in the darkroom, but then through that whole process, discovering these ways that are very specific to see prints and how they, I don't know, I've been surprised at how I've been able to push it, chemically, physically, or whatever. But part of that is, like, how can the photograph be present? Because everything is flattened out, and then this and that. And that also, weirdly, like, what do the images of my work look like? Because then they're out on the internet, and that's a whole other life of them, which is how a lot of people experience it. But I want the work to be, first and foremost, like, best seen in person. I can't really control how many people Twitter it out. They don't Twitter it. They Instagram it. Whatever. Matt?
Perhaps in relation to that twittering out, I couldn't help. Well, one thing, this is just a comment, that I find it like ultra refreshing that you deal with the photograph as a material in the world and not as images, because it seems like it obviously allows for the production of something totally alternative with, a kind of conventional, familiar use of the photograph. But I couldn't help but think like this attempt to return to nature and photograph nature when living in New York and the culture that we live in now, the photographic image kind of is our nature. It produces itself in a way that we don't understand. It's expansive, it overtakes, it functions like weeds sometimes. I mean, photographs do everything that nature does. And to go out there and re-photograph the sort of the natural environment that once was, I don't know. There's some weird conflation that's happening that I see in your practice with the photograph of nature and then treating the image of nature as a material, like as though it was a leaf or bark on a tree. So with all that said, maybe I'm curious as to how you actually do think of the image in the photograph, and maybe what is the work itself, like as a finished piece? Is it imaging something? Is there an image still there?
Well, oh man. I mean, first of all, yeah, I think that the whole process, it's hard to sort of, in some ways, step outside of this sort of thing I'm doing for myself, right? That my experience in these places is kind of separate from the image, but the image comes from it in a way, and then it's like a vestige of that moment that is totally different. So then when I see it for the first time, it's a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? But, and then at that point, as a photograph or as an image I've made, then I start there to see what it can do. But it has these weird lines going back to that original moment.
So the image itself is like as exotic as the moment when you discover something that you photograph.
Yeah, because I don't know. Because like when I'm shooting and I'm having the experience and being there, what I gather is like putting it in a black bag, you know, and like shifting around, and then I go back, and then like when I open it up and I see for the first time, then that feels like a discovery moment. Like the first time I see an image, or the negatives, the first time I do a contact sheet, then that's like a Christmas surprise. But that's also like the birth of the image for me, because that's the first time I'm seeing it. I mean, I saw it, but you know, it's like very different. So then from there, it's sort of how that image then is moved into something else. In some cases, it's almost treated like background, you know, or just like color. It's just color filler for the thing, but then it holds all that in there. And then there'll be like small moments that come out, you know, of it. Maybe you recognize something, but maybe a lot of it's just blurry green. So then there's other pieces where I can like pinpoint that image and then like ride on it really specifically.
I think what I'm curious about, or what I'm asking maybe, is not just like the image that is a result in the final production of the work,
Yeah.
but the work itself, like.
Oh, as an end result image?
As an end result image.
Oh, right.
Like for instance, the wood that's wedged into the wall that's holding the photograph.
Right.
For you, is that an image? Like an image? I mean, you can take that.
The image of the work.
But there's some real aggression in the way that you treat images and objects, and it's somehow there. I don't know. There's something there for me that you didn't seem to talk about in the work.
The aggression to the image?
Well, just maybe like the result of are you still imaging something in the final object that you produced?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I think what you're saying, I agree with. I just don't know how to answer, you know. Say that again?
The titling of a lot of your work does reference back to the image.
Well, and to the site, you know, like the title often refers to the site where I took the image, or the action that I submitted the photograph to. Yeah, and then it's this thing of calling it an image versus a photograph, you know, because to me they're photographs, not images. Images of after, images of the work or something.
Okay, so we're going to go to the next question, and I think this will be the last question.
You might have just kind of answered my question with, but sort of piggybacking off of Matt's question and Beata's question earlier, you talked about your desire to like fuck up the photograph, but then your relationship to the original images is sort of one of awe of the sublime. And so could you just talk about that relationship a little bit? Maybe it gets back to the aggression that Matt referenced.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is like my relationship to these photographs or images or these photographs I've taken and the locations, and then kind of trying to like make a situation for myself where I'm not attached to them, or, you know, like you touch down on it in that experience, and then there's this part, you know, this weird residue memento from it, but then to not be caught up in being emotionally tied to it or something. I mean, that was kind of what was happening with that blue piece where I like did that. It was like, why do I like this too much? And that like makes me angry. Like, I don't want to like this image. It's too pretty. It's too beautiful. that pisses, you know what I mean? Like but it's not, like why is beauty upsetting? You know, it's just like this thing where it's like, I can't accept it because it's just beautiful. That's not enough, or something, you know? And yet, like, you can kind of wrangle it, and then it retains some of that beauty in there, but then it can have another life as, like, I don't know, like, it's being preserved and destroyed at the same time. And that kind of doubling. And it then becomes something else, I think, I hope. Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.